Your past is holding your future back. Here's how. See, as humans, we are expecting our future to unfold the same way that our past did. But there's a problem with that. It perpetuates this idea that history has a tendency of repeating itself. But that's not entirely true. Life has a way of running through cycles, sure. But the repetition of the past or of history, that's us recreating that. Life doesn't recreate history for the sake of recreating history. It'll just follow cycles. But we as humans, we recreate the past because psychologically, we're stuck in it. And so the only way to create a new path for yourself moving forward that doesn't repeat the past is by letting go of the past. Here's what happens. Our minds are designed to try and predict the future. That's what we're constantly trying to do, which is not a fault, it's a feature. The thing though, is that when there are so many unknowns there, what we struggle with is that we start to fill in the details with imagination. Because there are so many unknowns and we're trying to predict the future, our mind places all these details in and all these bits of information that aren't true, that aren't guaranteed, but it fills them in order to make ourselves feel more secure in that we can predict some degree of the future and the way it's going to unfold. The problem with that is the source of that information. So where does that information come from? It's coming from our past. So based on the experiences that we've had throughout our past, we've developed beliefs. We've constructed these ideas, we've had these perceptions, we then write them down as beliefs, and then we carry those beliefs into the future. And so we believe that something's going to happen purely because it's something that we experienced in the past. So we take these past experiences and we project them out into the future. But why is that a problem? It's really simple. Because you're projecting some past experience that may never happen again, but you're expecting it to unfold in the future. Now, this is how we recreate the past. Because you're expecting a certain outcome based on a past experience, then you start reacting to this future event, to this future circumstance that hasn't happened yet, under the assumption that it's going to go the way it did last time. And so then you end up recreating the same outcome simply because of how you're showing up in that experience. So I see this as an example with a lot of my entrepreneurial clients who want to launch a new program or a new offering in their business. And their past experience with launches haven't gone well. They've failed and they didn't meet expectations. When it comes to this new offering, they're holding themselves back. They're being timid about it. And as a result of showing up with this timidity or this lack of belief in the offering, the market then responds with this semi-invested, I'm not really sure, toe dipping sort of vibe. And then as a result, the results that they get from that campaign or from that offering that they've launched are really terrible, like they suck, and they're not getting the results that they expected. And all that does is help them develop this belief, this confirmation bias that, see, I was right, when we release a new offering, people don't like it. What that doesn't factor in is the fact that they were showing up initially with the launch with this preconceived idea and assumption of how things were going to go. And so because they felt like they weren't going to get the results, they weren't leaning in as much as they could have with all the belief that they had. And so the market then responded to that. It was reflecting that back to them. I've certainly experienced this in my business, and I've coached many entrepreneurial clients who have been through the same thing. It's not because it's the exact same circumstance. It's a completely different offering, but they're just expecting it to unfold the same way. And so it ends up being a self-fulfilling prophecy. Interestingly, I'm also seeing this with the same clients who are trying to find a relationship in their lives. And they're not getting the results they want. The response that I get from them is that they can't find the perfect partner. The dating scene sucks. The people that they've been on dates with, it's just not working out. This isn't going to work. So because they've got these preconceived ideas of what the dating side or romantic side of their life is going to look like, they're showing up with that belief. And that belief is influencing how they invest themselves in the effort. They're essentially showing up half-assed. They're not fully invested in it because they're expecting that it's not going to work. And because they're expecting it's not going to work, they're not looking for opportunities to try and find somebody that they're genuinely aligned with. The issue isn't the circumstance, it's simply the belief. And they're basing that off their track record of previous relationships or previous dates that they've been on. And they're projecting the future to be based on how the past went. Time and time again, people are genuinely surprised by just how much they're predicting their future life, all aspects of their future, based on how their past was unfolding. So if our assumptions about the future are based on our experiences of the past, then how do we disconnect the two? How do we stop letting our past influence our future? There are two ways. These aren't the only ways, but these are the two ways that I've seen to be most effective for people. One is you push through your life, you push through your future, and you try and accumulate evidence that goes against what you believed. So if you believe the dating game sucks and you're not going to find a partner, that you push through and you go on 100 dates anyway to try and disprove your theory. And what you're doing through that experience is trying to accumulate a significant amount of evidence, a large volume of evidence that argues against your case. But you've got to be objective about the results. This works for some people. It works really well. I'm not against that approach. But what you've got to use against your belief system is volume, because you need a higher quantity to balance out the deep quality that you believe your belief holds. So it can work. And there's a lot of ways for that to work. You can think of going to the gym as one of those experiences. You might have the story that I can't build muscle, and that's a great story, and you might not have any evidence of building muscle in your past. So then the way for you to disprove that belief is go and do 100 days at the gym and keep training, doing progressive overload, increasing the volume of your sets and your weight. And as a result, you'll end up building some muscle, which will eventually help you disprove this belief that you've been carrying. That's one way to do it. Another way, which is highly leveraged and makes significant impact when it comes to changing the way you see your future, is simply by going back to where you develop the beliefs that this is how circumstances are going to unfold in the future, and start to challenge that construct that you're holding. So it's as simple as finding a situation in your life. If I use the dating example with one of my clients, they had this belief that the dating scene is shit, it's not going to work out, and I'm not going to find a partner. When we started to drill down into where that started, what they found was it started when they went on a string of 20 dates in the space of 6 weeks, I think it was. And they felt like things just weren't working out. So we started to dig a little deeper. And then what they ended up revealing was it wasn't actually those 20 dates. It was right before that, during a relationship that was ending, and they developed the belief that they're never going to find a partner off the back of that. Now, what was fascinating about that was the belief that they came out of that relationship with is that I'm not going to find somebody. So in all of the dating experience that they had since then, they were showing up with this belief that I'm not going to find anybody. What's the point? They're going to leave me anyway. Of course, it's going to create crappy results when it comes to dating. The same is true in business. If you're working on a new offering for your client base and you're finding yourself being withheld, you're being a little timid about whether or not you want to launch it, you're showing up with a perfectionism, you're trying to perfect it as much as you possibly can, that's usually fear. And the fear is based on some past experience you've had, so you want to go back and see if you can identify what experience in your past in business is influencing how you're feeling about this particular offering. Or it might be hiring somebody that you feel bruised by, and so you're worried about hiring the wrong person again. Whatever the experience is, you're unconsciously referencing something from the past. And so you want to go back and see if you can identify what experience in your past is influencing the way you're showing up in this experience today. Because I assure you, there's a relationship between the two experiences that isn't random. It's very much relevant to the way that you see both circumstances. The next thing you can do is just ask yourself, how are these two circumstances different? Because your mind is looking for how they're the same, but they're not the same. You're not the same person that you were back then as you are today. So you want to look at how you're different, but you also want to look at how the situations are different from one another. And what that's forcing your mind to do is start to see that you're not reliving the same experience. This doesn't have to go the same way the past did because it's not exactly the same. That forces your brain into a different view on the whole circumstance that you're facing. And then you want to ask yourself, based on whatever the belief is that you formed and whatever the perception was that you formed at the time, you want to ask yourself, how might the opposite be true? So if that didn't work, if that offering didn't work, and that means that you're a failure, that might be the belief that you take away from it, that you failed or that you're a failure in business. Ask yourself how the opposite might be true in that circumstance. And that might simply be by looking at it and saying, well, because it didn't work, that shows that I'm a success because at least I launched it. Or if it wasn't well received or you received criticism for it, then at least I'm proceeding forward. At least I'm creating momentum. And so it shows that maybe the way you've been looking at it is actually being in reverse. If we flip it around and we show the opposite, how the opposite may actually be true, you start to unstick yourself from the belief that's taking such a strong hold. To use the dating analogy again, it's the same situation. This client that I was referring to, who came out of this relationship and said, I'm never going to find somebody because this relationship ended. They're going to leave me anyway. I asked the same question. How is the opposite true? How is it true that by them leaving, that's actually helping you find somebody that's perfect for you? And that started to open up their thinking, and they started to look at the whole experience and then their future through a different lens. So more often than not, we've just got to flip the belief and the perception, and it starts to unlock a different view about the future. And the reason why I like to focus on shifting things in the past is because if your future is being referenced by past experiences, if you start to change your perception of past experiences, the future you imagine for yourself starts to change as well. And if you start envisioning and imagining a different future for yourself, then you start showing up in that future with a different level of certainty, a different level of belief, and you end up creating different results and outcomes. That's ultimately what you're trying to create. So the simplest way I've found with the most leverage to change the way we live out our futures is by changing the way we view our past. And then suddenly it completely opens up a world of possibility and opportunity for us in our future. It's as simple as that. It's not easy, but it's simple. So give it a go. Go back through your past. Start challenging the beliefs that you developed back there, questioning them, and looking for how the opposite might actually be true. And let that open up a whole world of opportunity moving forward for you. And who knows, maybe some cool stuff will start happening sooner than you realize. Now that we've got you creating a new future for yourself, it's important that you start developing a vision for that. Now, here's the biggest mistake that I see people make when it comes to developing a vision and trying to live it out. Make sure you check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for being here.